Well, Zeke, thank you for having us in your home today. You are known by many names, including the Mayor of Bleary. So I'm assuming this is the mayoral parlour then, is that correct?
Absolutely, most definitely.
It's a pleasure to be in the mayor's parlour this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Ian. Thank you. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. We're here to chat just about yourself and your life, and a little bit about family life and new mills and all the things that have happened along the way. So I suppose we better start at the beginning. Zeke, can you tell us a wee bit about the beginning for you, which was a little while ago, and where that was, and just as much as you can remember about the beginnings?
Well, as it turns out, I'm probably one of the oldest inhabitants of Bleary. I know of one person who is older, a lady, Winnie Calvert, who lives only a few hundred yards away, and she's now 99, I think it is. But apart from that, I was born on the 5th of December, 1935. So no spring chicken, Ian, definitely not. But having said that, thankfully I've had a long life, but health-wise, for about 80 of those years, couldn't have been better. Unfortunately, in the last few years, things have deteriorated somewhat. But I can still get about, and I still drive the car and so on, so I can still get about.
Well, that's good.
So I was born only a matter of 200 metres away from here, just out in that direction.
Right.
And that's where my father and mother, they lived there at the time, and then my father died in 1970. My mother survived him for quite a while and died in 1989. But I was born on a farm. My father owned the land around this area here, and I was brought up on a farm with one brother who was 3 years younger than me. But neither my brother or myself had any interest in farming, to be perfectly honest, because in those days, the biggest thing in the summertime was making hay. And we had to spend the whole summer making the hay by hand, as it were, you know, because there was no machinery. This was during the war years. And really, we got a turn-off from farming because all the other boys in Bleary were jumping on their bicycles and going here, there and everywhere. We had to spend every day making hay and then bringing it into the hay shed and so on.
Yeah.
But one of those things.
So you were 200 yards that way. You lived next door for a number of years, and
That's
then
right.
you moved back slightly towards the home place. So it's all happened within the space of maybe 500 yards. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
So you obviously
300 yards, actually.
300 yards.
Yes, because when Edith and I got married, we got married in 1960. Edith was from Lurgan. I have never been living anywhere else other than in Bleary all my life. But we got married in 1960, and I built the bungalow next door to here in 1960. Small bungalow, and extended it 3 times when we were in it. Built in 1960, we sold it in 1998, and built on this site that we're on now. So we've been, this is the 3rd house I have lived in. My birth house next door to here, and then moved 40 feet to this one.
Well, I mean, Bleary is such a strange name. Have you any idea about the origins of the name?
Not really, no. Bleary, I think I read somewhere many years ago, the home of O'Leary, but that means nothing to me.
Right. Some link
Maybe
there.
there might be some connection with O'Leary and McCleary.
Yes, I was about to say.
I don't know. But the McCleary family did come because we have a family tree. And in the family tree, in my home here, just as I say, 150 yards away, it was said in it, my grandfather at one day said, "Look out over the corner of Lough Neagh in that direction, and you'll see where the McClearys came from. It was in Tuam,
Right.
the northwest corner of Lough Neagh, but originally from Scotland, and then they moved to Tuam, and then from Tuam to Bleary. But that's way back in the 1700s.
So planters originally, obviously.
That's right.
Indeed.
That's right.
Well, Zeke, you mentioned building next door and building this one. There's a long list of things that you have built during your lifetime, more than most people, I think. I mean, I reckon, not just you, obviously, but with the team, but heading them up, certainly. The Campbell Hall, the both houses, rebuild of the church, the Lynn building, renovation of the manse, and sunroom on the manse more recently. What is it about building that attracts you?
I honestly don't know what any one thing. I was always interested in building to a certain extent, and I would quite often sit down with squared paper, not being an architect, but sit down with squared paper and design houses and so on, and look at them and think about them. And I mean, I designed next door originally, and I designed this house that we're in now. Now, my design didn't go through the planners, but I mean, what I had on paper was transferred from that paper to a proper architectural plan and so on. I'm just interested in buildings. That's it.
Well, Zeke, obviously the biggest project probably was the church and the rebuilding of the church after the fire.
It was.
That was quite a traumatic event for everybody in New Mills. What, were you up at the church the night that it went on fire?
I was sound. In actual fact, the fire in New Mills Church happened the first night of the General Assembly in that year, and I had been the elders' representative to the Assembly that year. So the Reverend Best and myself had gone down to the opening evening service and so on. We came home, went to bed, obviously. I take it Gordon was in bed too, and our phone rang at about 2 o'clock in the morning, and we answered it. It woke both Edith and myself up, and we answered it, and it was the Reverend Best to say, "The church is on fire." And he phoned me because I was the property convener at the time. And when I drove around to the church after quickly pulling on my trousers and shirt, drove around to the church, the flames were shooting 50 feet up into the air. Unbelievable sight. And the only person there standing in the middle of our present car park was the Reverend Best himself. Terrible. The fire brigade arrived within about 5 to 10 minutes after I arrived. And they did an excellent job in many ways, because at the time we were building an extension to the end of the church, the new vestibule on the minister's room behind. And that was the only bit that was saved, so they saved that, thankfully.
So having been a lifelong member of New Mills, I mean, you must have been going through a whole range of emotions as you stood there, just watching the place go
Absolutely.
up. What was on your mind?
Well, just the fact that well, at that point in time, we didn't know what had caused the fire. It was only next day, you know, that we realised that it had been an arson attack, and they had used the contractor's ladder to throw the ladder up against the front elevation of the church, pulled off half a dozen slates, and then threw petrol bombs onto the ceiling. And that's what started the fire. And then the whole church was burnt down.
So although I've been at New Mills for a number of years now, I never set foot in the old church.
Right.
How would you describe it to me?
Well, I do remember, I mean, going away back to whenever I was very young, and I'm talking about possibly 4 or 5 years of age, I would have been taken by my father and mother to the church. And I do remember 2 families arriving at the church each Sunday morning in a pony and trap. And the building, which is halfway up the main avenue up to the front of the church, still known as the stables, because in those days those 2 ponies were taken out of the trap and they were put into the stables and into a stall, and they were fed hay during the time of the service and so on. Okay. But I do remember that, and I also remember the lighting in the church was oil lamps, and they had to be lit by the caretaker on a Sunday morning and Sunday evening, certainly. And the wick of the oil lamp lit up.
Was it an attractive church inside?
Not particularly, no.
Right.
I mean, our present church, our new church, is much, much more attractive.
So I suppose if you contrast the emotions of that dark night with the flames licking up the sides of the walls, as you recall it, with the emotion of the official opening of the new church, with which you had been heavily involved, quite a contrast. How did you feel on that particular night?
I totally overjoyed, because the new church, I'll be perfectly honest, in my own personal opinion, if on a count of 3, someone had said when the congregation were in the old church, on a count of 3, I want you all to hop up and down 3 times. I do honestly believe the floor would have given way, and in all probability the ceiling would have fallen down, because it was an old building, definitely an old building, and we were spending money on the maintenance of it every year. There was a terrible problem with dampness, and the plaster was bubbling on the inside walls and so on. The heating wasn't nearly so good, obviously. It was a coke boiler down below ground. There were steps down to the boiler house at the back of the church, and that boiler was heated with coke and so on. So the heating wasn't nearly so good.
So whenever you set out to redesign what would become the new church, what would you say your vision was for it?
Well, our suggestion to the architect was a simple one. We want the church to be very similar on the outside to the old church, and the inside to be very modern. So this is what the architect planned, and if you look at photographs of the old building and the present building, you would think, quite honestly, it was the same exterior. There are now 2 extra windows on the front elevation, but apart from that, it was finished in the same sort of cement finish dash on the outside and so on, and looks very, very similar to the old church, but the inside is totally different.
And how does it feel to worship in the new church as opposed to the old one?
I think the worship service is slightly different. I do remember 2 persons in the church, in the old church, way back again, when I might have been only 7 or 8 or 9 years of age. I do remember 2 persons who actually turned their back to the pulpit and faced east when standing to sing. And when I say sing, I was going to say hymns there, but hymns were not sung in the old church.
Right.
It was only on very special occasions, maybe the like of at Easter or Christmas. But during 11 and a half months of the year, the only singing was of psalms only. But they used to stand with big, again, it was traditional seemingly in the earlier days for people to turn to face east in the church.
So I've heard it relayed to me that New Mills was one of the last congregations to get an organ. Is that true?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So
we had a presenter, Willie Chambers, and Willie he actually set 3 pews. The old church, by the way, didn't have individual chairs or anything. It was pews only. And Willie set 3 pews in front of our family pew. And he used to bring his tuning fork with him. And when the psalm was announced, Willie stood up and the congregation stood up, and then he tapped the tuning fork on the edge of the pew in front, held it to his ear, and then said, do, do, and then started the psalm, and everyone joined in.
Older ways, indeed.
Those were different, totally different.
Different ways, indeed.
And then the organ was eventually introduced, and a whole lot of people, quite honestly, weren't all that happy about it in some ways. You know, it was very modern, supposedly, at the time. But now, of course, we don't think like that.
No.
Thankfully.
No. Well, you must have gone through, or if that's the right phrase, a number of ministers then. Who was the minister when you were born?
I have sat in New Mills congregation under the Reverend Nimmons when I was a child, followed by the Reverend Campbell, and he was there for 27 years, and then unfortunately died very suddenly, and then the Reverend Porter for 7 years, and now the Reverend Best for 26 years. So 4 ministers during my lifetime.
All different, I'm sure.
Yes, in many ways. Mr. Nimmons, way back to my early years, he had been a missionary in China and returned home on illness grounds and so on, and came to New Mills. He was different because he had been abroad for a number of years. The Reverend Campbell then was new to the ministry, and that it was his first church. And he gave us great service. All of them did. All of them did exceptionally well. We have been blessed in New Mills in having 4 excellent ministers.
I think New Mills is maybe I would say well known or renowned for looking after their ministers. In fact, I believe was the Reverend Campbell was bought a car. Is that
That's
correct?
right. That's right.
Is there any stories you could tell me about
That's
that?
right. That's right. Well, I remember on the presentation of the car, it was an A30, Austin A30, and the night of the presentation, a few of the bad boys of the church, and I bad in inverted commas, whenever he went, it was rear wheel drive, you see, so whenever he got into the car and started it up to drive off with the congregation applauding and so on, 4 of the boys lifted the rear wheels off the ground, and there the wheels were just spinning around and he was going nowhere. I wasn't there.
Of course not.
Well, there were three others and myself, let's put it that way.
Indeed. Well, what would be your fondest memory of your, well, I'm sure there's more than one, but your fondest memory or memories of your time in New Mills?
I have enjoyed worshipping in New Mills all my life. I'll be perfectly honest. I wouldn't say there was any one thing that stood out particularly. Way back in my earlier years, and certainly in my teenage years, very much so. I mean, the greatest thing that happened in New Mills for me and anybody else of my age and so on was the junior Christian endeavour. There was a senior Christian endeavour, but then they started a junior Christian endeavour. So all the teenagers would have gone to the junior Christian endeavour. And the person who ran it, whenever I would have belonged to it, would have been a man called Walton Brown. And Walton was an elder in the church and an absolute gentleman. And he ran it exceptionally well. But I think Walton was also my main Sunday school teacher. And to be perfectly honest, I would say that Walton had a great influence on my life. And his son, of course, now is a Presbyterian minister in Coleraine, Andrew Brown. Oh, yeah. But Walton lived just a matter of 300 metres away from the church. But that was the only organisation that we had in the church at that time, the junior CE and the senior CE.
So let's go back a wee bit now. Your own life was spent in education. We'll come to that in a little while. But obviously, like all the rest of us, we've all had to go to school. And I presume you went to school just up that way a little bit?
I did. I actually attended. My father and Mr. McConkey, James McConkey, whom quite a number of the congregation would still remember. He passed away, unfortunately, about 8 or 9 years ago. But his father was principal of Ballydugan Primary School. Oh, right. And because my father and Mr. McConkey were very friendly, and they were both elders in the church and so on at the time, I was sent to Ballydugan. But unfortunately, it only lasted a week, right, because I threw a pencil or a rubber or something across the room, and the person in the junior half of the school, it was a two-teacher school at the time, and she took a ruler and beat me so hard that I said, I'm never going back to that school. And I stuck to my guns, and I started in Bleary School after 1 week. Right. So I was 1 week in Ballydugan, and then the rest of my primary years in Bleary Primary School.
So probably as punishment for that misdemeanour, you spent your life dealing with other bad boys then, is that fair?
That's fair enough, right, okay.
So what about Bleary?
I'll accept that.
What about Bleary then? How did you find it then? Was it good memories?
Yes, indeed. And I have to say this, that I think that one of the most terrible things that happened to Northern Ireland is a result of the Roman Catholic Church taking their pupils away from a mixed education, as it was in my time at Bleary, because I knew all my friends, half of my friends, anyhow, were all Roman Catholic, and I would have been in their houses, and they would have been in our house every day in life, and we sat side by side in class, and so on. And then the Roman Catholic Church made the decision that all Roman Catholic children would have to go to their own schools. And all the Bleary families who were of a Roman Catholic persuasion were moved to Lilo School, which is a good 2 miles away. Yeah. And there were no school buses or anything else in those days. And I mean, very few people would have had cars. And they had to walk, whereas there was only maybe 300 or 400 yards to the Bleary School. But apart from the convenience of the school, I think that the country overall, unfortunately, things started going the wrong way because the Roman Catholic and Protestant people didn't mix from an early age. And I think that made a world of a difference to our country and caused a whole lot of the problems eventually.
It's a debate that still goes on today, obviously.
Obviously, yes. Well, I think, there's a whole lot to be said for integrated education today, in that, and I think that has been proven in some of the earlier schools that were integrated.
So your time at school was enjoyable, I presume. Was that what led to you wanting to become a teacher yourself, or what did lead to you joining the teaching profession?
I'll be perfectly honest, I had applied for Stranmillis Teachers Training College, and on the day of the interview, I met one of my classmates from Lurgan College, and he said, if you go, I'll go, and I said, well, if you go, I'll go, and we both ended up going, and that was it. But I have to say, I was 38 years in teaching, and I enjoyed every moment of it. I did. I was never sorry that I'd chosen the wrong profession. I enjoyed it. And I have to say, and you're maybe going to ask me, where did you teach? But I started off in a brand new secondary school, because secondary schools were only built and being built the year that I finished. And I finished in 1957. And in 57, Orangefield Boys Secondary School was opened off the Castlereagh Road in Belfast, and I had applied for it, and I got the job there as physical education teacher. That's why I'm still relatively slim. But another chap on myself, he was a Belfast fella. There were two of us appointed to the PE department, and during that year that I was in Orangefield, Killigamane Junior High School, as it is known now, but then known as Killigamane Intermediate School, it was being built and finished. And it actually opened in January 58, the 1st of January 58. I had only been one term in Orangefield, and I felt terrible about even applying for a job closer to home and so on. But I waited, and then further jobs were advertised in Killigamane later on in the beginning of the following year, and I applied and was appointed to Killigamane and Portadown. So I started in September. I missed the first 6 months of Killigamane and remained in Killigamane then for the next 37 years.
And finished up as VP.
Sorry?
And you finished up as the vice principal.
I finished up as vice principal, yes. But I'd never, as I say, I'll be perfectly honest, I never ever applied for a job outside Killigamane during that whole time. I was very happy there.
Yeah.
We had a good staff.
Good staff. And
very good staff.
In terms of those happy days, I mean, what stands out as good memories for you? Was it the particular children or particular events?
I have to say, of all the schools probably in anywhere in the UK, we couldn't have had better pupils than what we had in Killigamane, and I think that was purely and simply because of parental interest in the school. And I ended up, after 37 years, I missed out taking the third generation of one particular family. If I had gone back the year that I retired on the 1st of September, the child who was the third generation in that family started school on the 1st of September. So you got to know not just individual pupils, you knew their parents and you had taught their parents and their grandparents, as would been in the case that last year.
And any funny stories you can relate to us? Maybe you want to take the names out, Zeke, maybe before.
Well, and there are two things that I do remember distinctly, apart from anything else. It ended up, I mean, I wasn't in PE all that long. I mean, I got out of the PE department when I was about 35. And then I moved into geography mostly, and then eventually into the library, because I don't know why, but I ended up the person in the school who did most of the organising of anything and everything. the main school timetable, examination timetable, school trips, school funds, and things that had nothing at all to do with teaching, but involved in that all the time, which was a great variety, quite honestly. And I enjoyed it, very much so.
So, I mean, I've heard stories now.
Well, I remember one, I would have been probably regarded maybe as fairly strict. And I remember one day I had a class in the library and I was involved with planning something, and I had everything sitting in front of me. The bell rang in the class, a new class came in, and I knew the class exceptionally well, and I said, right, now we're not going to be doing anything formal this period. I'm totally involved in work here, so I want you to get a book or a magazine. I'm going to give you 1.5 minutes to get that from the shelf. Sit down, and then I don't want to hear one sound in this room until the end of the period. And everything went well for about the first 5 minutes. There wasn't a sound, everybody was sitting, reading and so on. And then suddenly, I heard talk. And I looked up and there were about 6 of the class in a corner, up out of their seating in a corner, and the talk was coming from there. And I never said a word because they knew this is back in the days when you could grab somebody by the scruff of the neck, as it were. And I gently walked to the corner, grabbed each person by the scruff of the neck and literally sat them into about 6 different chairs. And the end of the period came and it was break time. And down I went to the staff room for a cup of coffee. And Ian Best, our art teacher, who was small and always sort of dressed more like one of the schoolboys and so on. And he looked at me and said, I'll never go into your room in my life again. You scared the living daylights out of me. And I said, what are you talking about, Ian? He said, when you walked over to the corner, I was one of the ones that you grabbed and threw into a chair. and Ian had got the shock of his life.
So not just the pupils, the teachers as well.
That's right. And
Good.
I remember too another incident. We had the Reverend, Mr. Woodman, who had been principal of the Portadown College for years, and a great educationalist and so on. But when he retired, he used to come into Killigamane for a couple of, doing temporary work and covering and so on. And I remember him saying to me one day, Zeke, I never knew what teaching was about until I came here to see. We had 9 different streams at that particular year, and the top stream was A, and it went right away down to I. And when you got down to the I stream, I mean, really, the intelligence level wasn't so high, and he would have taken those pupils, and to him it was an education. And he said, I remember him coming back the following year, and he said, do you remember Black Bob, he said, from last year? Do you remember in the lower stream? And he has now moved out of Killigamane. He said, I was going down the road on my bicycle yesterday, and I heard this voice, hello, Mr. Woodman. He said, I jumped off my cycle and threw my arms in the air and shouted, hallelujah. If it had been a Portadown College student, he says, they would have been shouting, what about you, woodpecker? And here, he says, was Black Bob from last year. Hello, Mr. Woodman. Wonderful, he says, wonderful children.
Were you I'm sure you were sorry to leave, or were you sorry to leave when you did eventually retire?
I had always planned to retire, and I probably would, maybe no matter what I had been in, I wanted to retire when I was 60, and I did.
Right.
And that was it.
That was it.
And I haven't done one hand's turn ever since.
Not one
By way of, I've never earned any money since. No.
Yeah.
No.
Well,
but thankfully I can get through on my miserable pension.
Miserable indeed. Well, Zeke, teaching was in the family really, because Edith also was a teacher.
Edith taught in Killigamane too, to start with. She was the first student in Killigamane in 1958. The school opened on the 1st of January 58, and she went into the school in February as a student. And then 2 years later, when she was finished, she never did an interview in her life, because she was sent for and said, "There's a job for you here in Killigamane." And that was it. So we were together for a few years. And then she moved out of the secondary because it was a strange situation. Edith at that time taught commercial subjects, shorthand and typewriting. And the Department of Education decided that a girl's fingers were not mature enough to work on a typewriter. And all the whole commercial teaching of commercial subjects in secondary schools stopped at that time. And I mean, when you compare that thinking with today, I mean, a 3-year-old is now using her fingers on a keyboard. But they were stopped at 14 at that time.
Imagine, interesting. So,
and she moved into the primary sector then.
Yeah. So, is that where you first met then, or?
No. We met at Stranmillis.
Right.
But I didn't know Edith. I'd heard about her around Lurgan, you know.
You'd heard about her.
Yeah.
So when did Edith?
So we're married now for 62 years.
So when did Edith and Zeke become a pair, an item?
1960.
Right.
1960, the 4th of August. That's right.
Very good.
I was 24 and Edith was 22.
Love at first sight, was it?
Absolutely. And after 62, I haven't had a word to say for the last 62 years.
I can see
totally under the thumb. Totally.
I doubt that, Zeke. Well, you've been blessed with a good marriage, and there's you and Edith and Stuart and a lovely family life together and so on.
Very much
I presume you've enjoyed it all.
We have. Yeah. We have, and I have to say I'm very, very thankful now on looking back in my life, thankful for a whole lot of things, but one of the things was good health up until the last few years. Good health, and we jailed, and always have done all of our married life, thankfully. And we always enjoyed good holidays every year and went abroad every summer.
Yeah.
And we have been on every continent on this earth other than Antarctica.
Right.
New Zealand, Australia, Malaysia, every country in Europe, North Africa, South Africa, Canada, United States, Colombia, and Newcastle.
And Newcastle. You must have been nearly as widely travelled as our late Queen.
Well, we always enjoyed holidays, I have to say. And probably of the holidays that we've seen a whole lot of the world and so on. If I had my life to live over again and ever thought of emigrating, I think the one country that always appealed to me was Western Canada. Right. Beautiful part of British Columbia. Beautiful part of the world. One of the most interesting holidays was a safari to South Africa and going to the safari park. And I mean, neither Edith or I really, I suppose, we never were in a zoo at home more than twice in our life. and the idea of seeing animals caged up and so on never appealed to us. But on that safari, to see animals in the wild and out, and up close, unbelievable, and we thoroughly enjoyed every moment of that.
So would you say that was your most favourite holiday?
It was, in one sense, because it was so different. But we have cruised about 7 or 8 times, and we always enjoyed cruising because you go to bed at night and you fall asleep, and the next morning you wake up in a different country. And in the olden days, I mean, it was a different currency and a different language. At least now they're nearly all around the Mediterranean, the Euro and so on. But in those days, in early days, it was different currency and different language. And they were always most enjoyable.
I'm also told that there's usually plenty to eat on those boats, Zeke.
Too much. The one thing I'm so pleased about is it never showed on me.
I can see that. Well, Zeke, you've developed some hobbies through your life as well. I mean, I know you did at a time throw the odd bowl.
That's right.
And you enjoyed the bowling, I presume.
I did.
Were you any good at it?
No, not particularly. No, there were many people in the club far better than I was. Unfortunately, a man whose widow still belongs to New Mills, Mary Culbert, her husband Harry Culbert, he started and he was the first captain of the bowling club in New Mills. And that was a way back after we built the Campbell Hall. And then I became captain the following year, and Harry had just introduced us to the game and so on. And then I was captain of the club for years. And that had nothing at all to do with my ability at bowls. But at the same time, I enjoyed it. But I mean, that was more in my older years. Although the good players can be teenagers nowadays, you know.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed it. But earlier on, my game was golf. I played golf regularly at Tondragee Golf Club.
Right. And did you have a handicap? I
had.
Are you going to share it?
No, I'm not going to tell you. No, it was. I mean, there was a team known as the junior county team, and I was on that team, and we played and we won the junior county cup. You know, playing against other clubs and so on for 3 or 4 years in the trot, and that was good. That was good.
Well, I suppose there have been different things throughout the different phases of your life. Obviously, there was a big chunk in the middle, which was work. But New Mills has been the thread running through it from day one, I presume, more or less, right, even until this very day.
I always took an interest in the church.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
I have been on the committee now for, well, I was appointed to the committee at about 30 years of age. So I've been in there for 55, 56 years.
Yeah.
And then I became an elder in 1995, I think it was. And I was an elder then, and then resigned from the eldership, or resigned from, you never resign as being an elder, but resigned as a working elder. And so on about 7 or 8 years ago, to leave young men like yourself to do the necessary work.
Well, I mean, you wouldn't say this, but I'll say it. I mean, the amount of time and effort, hours and commitment that has been put into New Mills by yourself over the years, I mean, it would be countless. It couldn't be counted. What motivates you to do, what was your motivation for doing all that and putting all that time and effort in?
I suppose the McCleary family historically have been associated with New Mills Church for well over 100 years. the McClearys, my grandfather's, in his time, he would have gone to Warringstown Presbyterian Church. Now we're talking about the 1890s and so on. He would have belonged to Warringstown Presbyterian Church. Why, I don't know, quite honestly, but he then changed and moved to New Mills. And then my father, all his lifetime, he was born in 1896. So all his lifetime, he was associated with New Mills. And my grandfather, Boyd McCleary, he was an elder in the church way back at that time. And then my father was an elder in the church. And then I became an elder in the church. Not that that means anything, it's the fact that there was that sort of family attachment to New Mills.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah. Well, the treasurer role, which you did and which I now do a bit of, is a challenging role. I remember you told me on day one, never forget, every penny belongs to somebody else and ultimately to God, and you have to watch the pennies, which was sage advice. Was that a challenge? Did you find it a challenging role? Did you enjoy the looking after?
I always enjoyed working with money because I did, that was another thing in Killigamane School. For 37 years in Killigamane School, I was in charge of the money. Any money that came in, went out in the school and so on, I was in charge of it. And the same in New Mills for 55 years, I was involved with it. And there's an attraction, this may sound ridiculous, but at the same time it is fact. In working with money, it can only be one of two things, either right or wrong. And if it's wrong, you have to make it right and find out where the mistake is. But there's no in between. And I always enjoyed that element to it, you know, that the getting it right.
Yeah.
But I mean, as you say, I always had in the front of my mind the fact that when you're working with other people's money, it's even more important that it has to be right all the time.
We've had the odd night, Zeke, where there was a missing tenner, and we've spent quite a bit of time trying to find it. Those can be challenging times, can't they?
They can be. They can be. But as I say, you've got to work at it, and it's always a simple mistake at the end of the day.
Usually.
That can put things wrong, but at the same time, no, you've got to work at it and find it.
Yeah. Well, you've had a number of decades now in your life and blessed with, as you say, good health for most of it and so on. If you had a chance to go back to one particular decade and relive it, which one would that be, do you think?
I think the world, not necessarily me particularly, but I think throughout the world things have changed greatly. And attitudes have changed, and there's, quite honestly, I think one of the greatest things is commitment. I don't think that, generally speaking, there's the same commitment to certain things that there would have been years ago. Maybe I'm wrong in that, but I think that commitment has a whole lot to do with life generally, and anything that I did, I suppose I was quite committed to it, and it paid off at the end of the day because it makes you a happier person, I think.
And if you could go back though, I mean, did you enjoy your 30s when you were just starting in work, or did you enjoy your 40s, or
well, the crossroads down here, just 50 yards away. When I was a teenager, there wasn't a night in life from the months of April until the month of October, that there wouldn't have been 20 people at least, every night in life down at the crossroads here at the bottom of the avenue. And we would have been playing horseshoes. Did you ever play horseshoes?
I know what you mean, yeah.
You know what I mean? Throwing the horseshoes at a ring and so on. And that was played every night in life, as well as a football match on the crossroads.
Down there.
And that's the sort of thing I remember as a teenager. I mean, it was activities all the time. And there were always local people whom you were friendly with and so on. And Bleary at that time, the closest police station who sort of were responsible for Bleary was the Warringstown police station. And the sergeant in Warringstown, I mean, he didn't have a car or anything else. He always came to Bleary on a bicycle. But when we had been playing football on the crossroads, you would see him coming on the bicycle up at the bend, 500 yards away. And of course, by that time, the ball was stuck into somebody's pocket, and we were all lying on the bank of on the grass and chatting, and he would come along and he would have had a wee yarn. Then he got onto his bicycle and away he went, and that was it. And my father bought a tractor in 1948. It was the only tractor in Bleary, a wee grey Fergie. And I was, well, I mean, I wasn't, there's no way in which I had a license or anything else, but I used to drive the tractor on the road because all our land was up the Calverstown Road here, and I used to drive. And the Warringstown sergeant would have come on his bicycle and he would have said to a neighbour, "Would you tell Sam Boyd McCleary that son of his was seen driving the tractor up and down the road during last week, and he has no license, so make sure it doesn't happen again." And of course, it was like water off a duck's back, and I was back driving again.
You drove anyway, indeed.
That's right.
Well, I suppose being able to look back over a good life, not that you're anywhere near the end, Zeke, of course, we're not talking like that. Plenty more to go, hopefully. But if you could summarise for me one really important lesson that you've learned in life, something that's really, been quite profound and helped you as you've grown older, what would it be? That's a very difficult question.
It is. I suppose the ability to say sorry is, I think, a very important attribute to have. The ability to say, the ability to encourage people and so on, I think is a great quality to have. I'm not saying that I have them, but at the same time, I think, yes, it's good to encourage. I think that even going back to New Mills again, just to say to the minister, I mean, I think that our present minister, the Reverend Gordon Best, preaches an exceptionally good sermon, for example, and runs the church exceptionally well. And in just a wee word, as you're walking out of church and saying, "That was an excellent sermon," it's a great encouragement to him. And it's lovely to hear that again. I mean, I now meet past people. For example, I was in Marks and Sparks in Sprucefield on my wee electric scooter, scooting around the stall, and I heard this voice behind me saying, "Zeke McCleary." And I stopped and I looked around, and here was this big man standing. And I reversed back to him and I said, "Was it you who was calling my name there?" He says, "It was me." And I said, "Well, I haven't a clue who I'm speaking to." He says, "Well, you taught me in 1959 in Killigamane School." He says, it was 79 next birthday. And he had spent 25 years, 30 years, I think he told me, in the RUC, and retired, and he had emigrated to Australia. And then 2 of the daughters had gone out with him and 2 had remained, and his wife wanted to return, so he came back, and he's now living in Bangor. When I asked him his name and so on, and he said it, I wouldn't have recognized him. But when he told me his name, I did remember him exceptionally well. And that happens to me regularly now. I once met 3 people on the one day, 2 of them in Lurgan and 1 again in Marks and Spencer's in Sprucefield, and all of them were 75 years of age, the 3 of them. So it'll happen to you too. And
I'm sure it will.
It will, of course.
I hope it will. Well, a couple of fun questions, Zeke. If you could have dinner with any 3 people, alive or dead, bring back to life, obviously, who would they be?
Well, I think one of them would be yourself.
Oh, thank you very much.
Because purely and simply because I'd have expect you to pay for the dinner.
Of course.
Of course. Of course you would. I have to say, as things stand at this moment in time, on this particular day, and what has happened over the last 9 or 10 days, the death of the Queen, it would have been absolutely marvellous to sit down with the Queen.
Yes.
I think she was a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful lady.
Yes.
And to sit down with her and just talk to her, the same as we're talking together here, would have been a wonderful time together.
Agreed, yeah.
That would have been one. I've never thought about this particularly. Probably a sports person, you know, because I've always been interested in sport and so on. It would be lovely to sit down and have dinner maybe with a sports personality who's very well known, the like of Rory McIlroy, say.
Yeah.
You know, you could have a good chat about
You could.
the hole-in-one, or the ones that I missed, or the ones that he has missed recently. And a third one, well, again, maybe a politician. Although I have to say, I never in my lifetime have had seriously steeped in politics. I never was. And I think a whole lot of politicians, quite honestly, regard it as a money-making business rather than thinking of the people whom they represent and should be working harder maybe. But maybe a politician to chat about things like that, possibly.
Interesting choice. So at this stage of your life, you've retired now a number of years, and you're not as busy with the church, let's put it like that, and so on. So you have a bit of time on your hands. How do you spend this time? How do you spend your time now? What does a typical week look like for you now?
Well, I have to say that Edith and I spend a lot of time together. I have to say that. I mean, there's not a day in life that we're not together somewhere. And it may not be very far, it may only be Lurgan or Portadown. Funnily enough, it's a strange thing, I spent 37 years in Killigamane School in Portadown. And I was never downtown, I would say, 3 times in the year, because fortunately for me, the school was on the Bleary side of the town. And it was exactly, and I measured it many a time, it was exactly 3 miles from the front door here or next door to the school door in Killigamane. And I remember my first year in Orangefield, there were members of staff and they couldn't have afforded a car in those days, and they were travelling by bus, and they would have given their right arm to have a school that they didn't have to travel to and so on. and I ended up with one. And I can seriously say that in the 37 years, in the 3 miles from Bleary to Killigamane School, I would say you could count on the fingers of one hand the number of cars that ever passed me, or the number of cars that I ever passed. It was just through a country road, and it took me exactly 5 minutes. And that was a blessing in its own way.
Yeah.
I mean, you yourself now appreciate you're driving much. How long does it take you to get to school?
22 minutes.
Aye, there you are, 22, and probably driving at 60 and 70 mile an hour.
Yeah.
Sorry, and Renaults don't do that.
No, they do not.
No, they don't. It's only good cars like Audis.
Audis. Well, we don't have one of those. I have it on good authority. You could tell the price of a cup of coffee in every cafe in Lurgan.
You're absolutely correct. Absolutely.
And the quality of the
And
scones.
why not? I enjoy my coffee. It's not so much the coffee, it's the fellowship.
Yeah.
The fellowship, and I meet different people. And there was one time after I retired, 5 of the staff of Killigamane who had retired just before me, or immediately after me, or at the same time. And we went out every Wednesday in life to have lunch together. And that was lovely just to do that. And I mean, we would have spent maybe a couple of hours talking rubbish, but at the same time it was enjoyable. Unfortunately, I'm the only one left.
Right.
The other 4 have gone.
Yeah.
And that's the way of life and death. That's it.
It is indeed. Well, Zeke, it's been a pleasure to have a chance to reminisce with you and talk about old times and present times. And thank you so much for giving us the opportunity. We could have talked about a lot more, but time has beaten us. We do appreciate your time, and thank you so very much.
Not at all, Ian. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
And you're very welcome to come back anytime.
I'll take you up on that. We'll have a little bit of fun. I'm going to ask you some questions, and you simply have to choose one or the other.
Right.
You must choose one or the other.
Okay.
All right.
I'll try.
All right. So it's like quick fire. Cats or dogs?
Cat.
Red sauce or brown sauce?
Red sauce.
Summer or winter?
Summer.
Portadown or Glenavon?
Oh, definitely Glenavon. Definitely.
Steak or chicken?
Steak.
Chinese takeaway or Indian takeaway?
Don't eat either.
Edith McCleary's chocolate cake or Ruth McConaughey's apple tart?
Both.
Elvis or Beethoven?
Who?
Elvis or Beethoven?
Are they footballers?
No, I'm afraid not.
Oh no. Oh, I know who you're talking about. Beethoven.
Beethoven. Really?
Yeah, really.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
No company or bad company?
What was the first one again?
No company or bad company?
No company.
Do you want do you like the toilet paper to hang down the front of the roll or down the back of the roll?
Sorry again.
We'll scrap that one.
Take your mask off.
Halloween or Christmas?
Christmas.
Early morning or late night?
Don't mind. Probably late night.
Summer holiday or winter holiday?
Summer holidays.
Yes. Comedy movies or horror movies?
Who?
Comedy movies or horror movies?
Oh, the first one.
Comedy.
Comedy.
And would you prefer the swimming pool or the sea?
Oh, the swimming pool.
Not the sea.
No, because you can't touch the bottom.
That's true. Zeke, you're a gentleman, thank you.